And now for more, we welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, former international spokesman in the IDF and a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and our correspondent and host, Nicole Sedek. Thank you both so much for being here in studio. So I want to start, Jonathan, with that latest update we just heard there from my colleague Balich. Egyptian pressure on Hamas squarely being blamed for the collapse of efforts towards a deal. No surprise in this part of the world, but hearing that the pressure is coming out of Cairo on the terror group is something new. Your assessment?
It is definitely new, and I think it's interesting and welcome. That's a fresh approach from the Egyptians, who up until now have been the main facilitators of Hamas's remaining in control of the Gaza Strip. Egyptian refusal to open the gates at Rafah is what has kept about 2 million Palestinians stuck inside the Gaza Strip, has prolonged the war unnecessarily, in my mind. And had Egypt wanted to end this war, it could have ended it a long time ago by allowing Palestinians to flee the battlefield, which, by the way, they should be pressured to do under the Rome Accords and under international humanitarian law. When civilians want to flee a battlefield, they should be allowed to do so. That's called asylum. And for some unclear reason, Egypt hasn't been forced to do so. Setting that aside, what Israel is doing, in my mind, is trying to apply pressure, political and diplomatic pressure, by threatening to use military force to attack Gaza, the last stronghold, the biggest stronghold of Hamas. And Israel wants things to happen instead of being forced to actually use force and to go in for that significant maneuver. That, I think, is what we're seeing now. Egyptian pressure, there's been report of Qatari pressure as well. And at the end of the day, I think that if Israel can achieve a partial deal, or a deal that brings back many of the live hostages and puts a long-term ceasefire on the table without having to go into a massive operation on the ground and underground, there's a good chance that that is what Israel is looking for and that Israel will take it. If Hamas continues to refuse, as they have refused up until now, and of course Hamas is strengthened by all of these statements of support by Western countries for the so-called Palestinian cause, and then they harden their bargaining position. And if Hamas continues to refuse, then Israel will probably use the military option and go in. But I think that we're still within that time frame where there's an option for diplomacy to run its course, a renewed urgency, hopefully. And if that works, great. If it doesn't, then it is the military option. But I think it'll take a long time before Balich or any other correspondent on the border will see advancing troops. We have reserves that need to be recruited again. They have to be kitted and task force oriented, and it'll take some time before Israel is ready to do that.
Before we get to those potential options inside Gaza, and controversial they are indeed, we are seeing the reaction inside the country, outside the country as well. I want to pick up on the remark you made about Egypt's role or lack of role when it's come to a solution for Gazans wanting to leave the enclave. Why hasn't there been more pressure on Cairo?
Well, I think credit to Egyptian leaders for getting away with murder. Very cleverly done, diplomatically, very clever maneuvers, working with the Biden administration. And I think that the first message coming out of Cairo on October 7 or October 8, almost 2 years ago, was nobody shall pass. Palestinians will not be allowed to exit the Gaza Strip, no matter what, no matter what the situation. And they've been very steadfast in that principle because they do not wish the conflict really to end. Egypt has been profiting off the situation in Gaza. They have been profiting of Hamas's existence. They have been allowing weapons through Sinai into the hands of Hamas. Egyptian officials, the Sinai governor and many key army officials have become quite rich in that process. And at the end of the day, it's a great pressure lever to have against Israel. Sadly, Israel has been allowing this. And instead of applying pressure on Egypt through the US, through European countries, to be a good neighbor, to be an Arab neighbor of the Palestinians, and to be compassionate, to allow people out, in their time of need for a temporary situation in Sinai, which they could have done. They haven't been allowed to do so. And I think that the greater strategy here is one whereby Egypt manages the situation, uses the suffering in Gaza for its own strategic benefit, isn't asked to pay for it. But sadly, at the end of the day, we can be as frustrated as I am with the Egyptians. At the end of the day, Israel and the US and everybody else will need Egyptian support for whatever we want to do the day after. I hope that Israeli policy changes when it comes to Egypt and that Egypt is held accountable for their actions.
The day after is a contentious issue. It's been debated since the start of the war, Nicole. And we know in recent days, Benjamin Netanyahu confirming Israel does not want to stay in Gaza. It wants to take control of parts of the Strip, but does not want to remain there. At the same time, mention of a civil administration for the day after. Not quite clear what that is going to involve at this juncture, but what is the reaction so far from the public and from the Palestinian communities to this plan so far?
So far, it seems that no one is truly happy because, as Jonathan also laid out, both options are still on the table, whether it's diplomacy, reaching some sort of a ceasefire and hostage release deal, or the full military takeover. Now, the Ben Gvirs and the Smotriches want to see a full military takeover, so they're not happy with this plan because this is just Gaza City, and up until that military operation even begins, it leaves room for diplomacy, which they're not liking. And then on the other side of that, you have the family members of the hostages, or more left-wing, that state we should not even be going near Gaza City because this is where some of the hostages are believed to be held. You're going to be risking them. And even by going in there, why would Hamas then agree to a deal? And so it seems neither side of the Israeli public is happy with this. And then you talk about, well, what happens next in the civil administration? As the prime minister laid out the 5 different points that need to happen. Here you can see in order for this plan to advance, and one of them being a non-Israeli civil administration in Gaza. Now, this is significant in itself because it does reiterate the fact that Israel does not want to take control of the 2 million Palestinians that are in the Gaza Strip. However, critics do state that if Israel goes forward and takes over Gaza City, you become the civil administration. You have to take care of the humanitarian aid, which Israel is already doing in more of the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. You have to make sure food, electricity, all of the humanitarian access is delivered to those Palestinians. And so some sort of a civil administration that would be in the future, which more Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is stating that in order for us to even address that, we have to tackle Hamas first. And to tackle Hamas, we have to go into Gaza City. But then, as I just mentioned, the critics say that this is not the way. And so when it comes to some sort of a civil administration, if it's someone like Yasser Abu Shabab, which Israel has been working towards, many people say that he still and his clan does not have the gravitas or the force to actually have some sort of a civil administration. Would it be the Palestinian Authority then? Israel and the prime minister doesn't want the Palestinian Authority involved in this whatsoever. And so when we see these 5 points that were presented, a civil administration is great in theory, but we truly don't know exactly how that will operate inside Gaza as it stands.
There are no good options inside Gaza. What is the best of the bad options, Jonathan?
Yes, there are no good options. And following up on what Nicole said, just to explain the conversation here between the military and the cabinet and the political echelon. It's been reported in Israeli media that the IDF basically told the cabinet that, no, we are not happy with this option. You're tasking us with an assignment. We will prepare the plans and present them for your approval. But we're also telling you that we are not happy because, and this is my interpretation, it is unclear what the end state is. And the military, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, knows very well that if you break it, you own it. And he doesn't want to own Gaza in the sense of a civil administration. And if there isn't yet a clear entity that has a name, an organization, and political support, then he will be it. The IDF will be it. And the IDF, and I think quite correctly so, says, well, we're not too eager to do that. We're all about defeating the enemy and finishing the war, getting the hostages back. That's great. But what the military tells the politicians is, we need you to tell us what the end game is. And until you do, we are not happy to launch a significant maneuver into Gaza because we need to know what we're building and what we need to support.
What is the end game?
Exactly. What is the end game? Well, if you ask me, that differs very much on who you're asking in the cabinet. and which of the politicians, and depending on domestic politics. I think in Israel today it's so much more influenced by domestic politics than reality on the ground. Had it been about winning the war and defeating the enemy only, I think we could have done that about a year ago, maybe even more than that. But all kinds of other considerations have been thrown into the mix. And sadly, today we find ourselves in a situation where it is increasingly challenging to get the job done, to defeat the enemy and get our people back.
Talking of which, stay with us, talking about the dynamics and challenges on the ground. An Israeli airstrike on Gaza City has killed Al Jazeera correspondent Anas al-Sharif and 5 other media workers while they were sleeping. The IDF says al-Sharif was also a Hamas terror cell leader. The incident sparking fresh calls for investigations from Arab and Western officials. More in this report by Al-Nasri Nasser.
An Israeli strike on Gaza City late Sunday killed Al Jazeera correspondent Anas al-Sharif and 5 other media workers. The group was in a tent near Shifa Hospital, according to local officials. The Israel Defense Forces said al-Sharif was targeted as he was a terrorist operating under the guise of a journalist serving as a Hamas cell leader involved in attacks against Israel. The IDF noted that in October, it published documents seized in Gaza showing the affiliation of al-Sharif with Hamas.
This crime is not a spur-of-the-moment crime, but rather an extension of the series of Israeli crimes that have been ongoing since October 7th. Journalists in this war have become a legitimate target. Killing them is a duty to obscure the word and attempt to hide the truth.
Al Jazeera denied Israeli accusations and accused it of targeting its reporters. Al-Sharif was known for reporting from frontline areas others didn't get access to, and was granted rare access to document the release of the former Israeli hostage, Agam Berger. Israeli advocates in the word posted today also pictures Al-Sharif took in the past with Hamas top officials, among them killed leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar. The strike comes as journalists continue to work in Gaza under severe shortage of food, electricity, and safe shelter. The incident has sparked condemnations from Arab governments as well as turning to be a top headline in the media, adding to international pressure on Israel over civilian casualties.
So for more, we now welcome Gil Hoffman, Executive Director of the organization Honest Reporting. He joins us from Jerusalem. Gil, thank you so much for joining us once again. Heated reaction, obviously, to the story, coming down to the question, who is a journalist, who is a terrorist, and who is a terrorist posing as a journalist? Your insights in this case.
There are plenty of terrorists who have been acting as terrorists in Gaza. There have been terrorists acting as journalists, and there have been journalists acting as journalists. You have to be very careful between them and among them. Al-Sharif worked as a terrorist besides working as a journalist. If he was just a propagandist for Hamas, there are many of those, I don't think the IDF would have targeted him. He was targeted because of his role in the military wing of Hamas. He was targeted because he was involved in rocket fire, just like any terrorist involved in the rocketing of Israeli civilians would be. If Israel was aiming at journalists, then there would be a lot more who have been killed. They've tried to avoid it as much as they can.
Talking about the grey area here, so Sky News posting the story on social media. Take a look, though, at this response from former Israeli hostage Shlomi Ziv, who posted this comment. He says, "I was held by a journalist in captivity and his father was a doctor." Talk about a first-hand account. Your thoughts?
Yes, Shlomi Ziv was held in Gaza by Abdallah al-Jamal, who was the correspondent for the Palestine Chronicle, and he was a full-time hostage keeper in addition to being a journalist on the side. In this war, because Israel did not let journalists into Gaza, your typical journalist covering this war is not your Daniel Pearl or Edward R. Murrow. It's Abdallah al-Jamal. It's somebody who was connected to Hamas, who was involved in the war effort against Israel, and who was a journalist on the side. And people need to understand that around the world. This is who they're getting their news from. They're not getting objective news from Gaza. They're getting the news that Hamas wants people to hear.
But when it comes to the scrutiny on Israel, on this very point, the IDF has published documents, it says, show that Anas al-Sharif was a terrorist operating under the guise of a journalist. We saw in that report many posting pictures of the way he was given access to cover the release of Agam Berger when she was freed from captivity, also photographs of him with Yahya Sinwar, and still many are questioning the IDF evidence of his links to Hamas. So what does Israel need to do in this particular arena in terms of getting the correct facts out?
You know, when it happened, the IDF put out a statement in English, it put out graphics, it put out proof that he was a terrorist. And then we see top media outlets from around the world have not even put it in their coverage. They portrayed him as a journalist as if your average journalist from I-24, God forbid, was killed. And that's not acceptable. They need to be held accountable, the media outlets that are giving the people around the world only half the story. They've made it look like Israel purposely is out to murder journalists, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Israel's out to murder terrorists. And if you don't put that in the headline, or at least in the first paragraph, then you're misleading the public. And that's unfortunately what the top media outlets of the world in the United States and in England did today.
And to that exact point, I'd like to bring in the former IDF spokesperson, Jonathan Conricus. At the start of the war on the 7th of October, there were many of these journalists, I say that in inverted commas because they seemed to get access to the border long before Israeli security forces got even close. They were covering the massacre and the abduction as it unfolded. Your sense of exactly what is playing out here and what Israel and specifically the IDF needs to do in terms of getting the correct facts out to the global media?
Yeah, including Anas Sharif. He was there on October 7th. He was praising Hamas. He was writing about heroes and how beautiful and great God is, that the heroes were inside the occupied territory and killing Jews, or something to that effect. I remember Ethan Fischberger on X tweeting about it and doing a whole expose of who that guy was. The problem runs deeper. I have no doubt whatsoever that Anas Sharif and many others are dual-purpose individuals. They are journalists, perhaps by day and night, but they're also terrorists, and there's clear evidence from Hamas documents put out by the IDF that he was a junior squad leader of a anti-tank missile unit in Jabalia. No surprise. I'm also not surprised that Al Jazeera would refute it, because Al Jazeera is a mouthpiece for the Muslim Brotherhood, and it is perhaps the biggest and most powerful organization in the world that promotes that brand of terrorism. Without Al Jazeera, Hamas would be far less influential with Palestinians and with Arabs around the world. So it doesn't surprise me. Regarding the IDF, the small positive is they got the information out in real time, and they even preempted most with actually taking him out and issuing a statement, very close proximity, that informed people of who he was. The issue here is that there's a conflict in policies, and on one hand, the IDF and the State of Israel bars international journalists from getting into Gaza, and then on the other hand, is seen by others as attacking others, journalists. And what Gil said very correctly, we have a problem with the coverage coming out of Gaza, and we have had a problem with coverage coming out of Gaza for many years, because it is Palestinian stringers that are either ideologically aligned with Hamas, or they are deterred by Hamas and they do what Hamas tells them to do. And in any case, the coverage coming out of Gaza is dominated by Hamas. And Israel, in its unwitting behavior, hasn't really changed that situation. And of course, gullible or otherwise sinister journalists around the world. I just saw Clarissa Ward selfieing a video in the streets of, I think it was New York, with great crocodile tears over her colleague Anas Sharif, not mentioning his affiliation with Hamas and just talking about how atrocious Israel was, and without even recognizing how corrupt the whole media scene is in Gaza. But I think Israel would be wise to allow international media in, to have embeds, and to provide more access, because the coverage coming out of Gaza is extremely harmful for Israel, and it doesn't do Israel a lot of good.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserve, Jonathan Conricus, thank you very much for your input. Your parting thoughts, Gil Hoffman, on exactly that. I've got 30 seconds.
Netanyahu in the press conference to the foreign press said he issued a directive that he was going to allow journalists into Gaza. The IDF has not received that directive. We'll see if that will really happen.
We wait to see if that will, in fact, happen. Gil Hoffman in Jerusalem, thank you very much for being with us today on I24 News. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And now a very quick break, but when we get back, Australia announces it will recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly next month. And also down under, convicted sex offender Malka Leifer has reportedly been moved to solitary confinement in a jail in Melbourne after an incident involving a young female inmate. Stay tuned. Back in a bit.
Are high interest rates keeping you from selling your home? We have a way to get you more money for your home while saving thousands in commissions. At Ideal Agent, we'll connect you with a top local agent who will sell your home fast, for top dollar, and all this for as low as a 2% commission.
We paid a 2% commission, which I don't think we would have had with any other agent, and we got top dollar for our house, and we are just so happy about it, and the results were fantastic.
Ideal Agent connected me with the top 1% agent in my market, and I actually got it at a discount, and I saved about $12,500, which is unheard of when you're working with the top producer in any industry.
We've helped tens of thousands of home sellers get 5-star results with top performing experts you can trust. We guarantee it. Ideal Agent is available nationwide, there's no obligation, and best of all, our service is completely free. Call today or visit idealagent.com.
Jerusalem, 1913. There's an epidemic. Up to 90% of children had trachoma. Thousands went blind. Yet one woman had a vision. It started with 2 nurses from America, and today it's 2 world-renowned medical centers, treating more than 1 million people a year, plus youth villages, saving hundreds of thousands since the Holocaust. This is the work of Hadassah, America's largest Jewish women's organization, and a life-changing force in Israel. We helped build Israel's health infrastructure, saved lives during every war and crisis. And now, Hadassah hospitals are pioneering personalized medicine with robotics, 3D printing, AI, and providing essential trauma care. For over 100 years, our vision has been clear: to help heal our world. This is Hadassah.
Welcome back. Our coverage continues. The Western Wall complex in Jerusalem has been defaced with graffiti with the words in Hebrew saying there is a Holocaust in Gaza. Now, security guards at the Kotel noticed the graffiti on Monday morning and called police. Later, it emerged that graffiti with a similar message was sprayed on the wall of the Great Synagogue in central Jerusalem. The graffiti has since been removed. So for more, correspondent and host Nicole Zedek is here in studio. What a disturbing incident. What more can you tell us?
It is a disturbing incident, but the facts that are starting to emerge right now paints a picture of a 27-year-old Jerusalem resident from the ultra-Orthodox community with severe history of mental health issues. And so this is what his family is now coming out and stating. He immediately after questioning, once the police found this man, he admitted that he confessed to the crime and apologized for it as well. But given his past history of mental health issues, after actually coming to a judge and the police had asked for his detention to be prolonged and even a ban from the Western Wall, but the judge right now has actually just issued him to a psychiatric stay in a hospital. It seems like that is the best option right now. As far as Hebrew media reports, in fact, the police had requested to ban this 27-year-old man from going towards the Western Wall, but the judge reportedly said, I don't ban Jews from going to this holy site. And so the way that this is treated, of course, you see these images, and thankfully they were able to successfully clean all of the graffiti off of this 2,000-year-old holy religious site. It is being condemned from all sides, even from the far right that says already a sacred religious site like this should never be defaced, especially for these messages calling a Holocaust in Gaza. This is not the way. And even those that are calling for an end to the war and claiming that there is starvation in Gaza, they're stating that this is still not the way to have any sort of political messaging near something as sacred as the Western Wall. And so I think that this image is certainly gaining headlines in Israeli media, but the fact that this is someone who is suffering with mental health illnesses paints a different story. The big question still right now is, although the police were able to find this man and arrest him, how it happened in the first place, because this is such a busy area.
Security is very strict in that part of
security around, and so that's where this investigation will lead now, rather than more of the motives behind an attack like this.
Nicole Zedek, as always, appreciate the update. Thank you very much for being here in studio. Now, a recent report by the Washington Free Beacon claims the Trump administration sent a non-public notification to Congress determining that UNRWA cannot be salvaged and must be disbanded, in part due to its links to Hamas. Now, the agency has long been criticized for corruption and serving as an impediment to a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim reports, UNRWA is determined to keep Palestinians in refugee status, even if they ask to have it removed. Take a listen.
There's a line in a classic rock song: you don't have to live like a refugee. But if you talk to UNRWA, you actually do have to live as a refugee. Palestinian-American digital creator Mo Gawi recently went to an UNRWA office in Beirut and said a family member wanted to be taken off UNRWA's list of refugees, having acquired citizenship from Great Britain and no longer in need of UNRWA's recognition or benefits. According to what Gawi told I-24 News, the UNRWA staff in Beirut first pushed back on the idea, questioning the benefit of an UNRWA refugee asking to be delisted. Then he was told the family member could have their name struck from the Palestinian Authority registry, but as far as coming off the refugee list, it's not possible. There's simply no procedure for it. Was the staffer misinformed or deceptive? Well, we went straight to UNRWA and asked, and they confirmed it, telling I-24 News that, quote, registered Palestine refugees can only be removed from UNRWA's register upon their death or in case of false or duplicate registration, not upon request. We were told that the UN General Assembly requires UNRWA to provide assistance and protection to Palestine refugees until a just solution to their plight is reached, and that UNRWA maintains registration records and issues identification documents for Palestine refugees, crucial for their access to services and the legal recognition to which they are entitled. Well, why can't someone have personal ownership over whether they are called a refugee, especially those who were born into that status and never requested it? UNRWA told us that global protection principles and privacy standards do not recognize an unqualified right to the erasure of personal data. The personal data of refugees may be deleted when there is no legitimate basis for the processing or where the personal data is no longer necessary for the specified purposes for which it was collected. The best UNRWA could do, we were told, is that it may, in exceptional cases and on the request of the beneficiary, deactivate their profile so that they are no longer actively maintained on the beneficiary list, so that the refugee or any spouse or dependents will no longer be able to directly access health, education, and other humanitarian relief services from UNRWA. However, deactivation of a profile does not affect the underlying registration of that refugee, nor does it change their legal status as a Palestine refugee under international law. Our critics of UNRWA have accused the agency of purposefully inflating its refugee rolls for political reasons and for financial reasons. The more refugees, the more aid money that comes in. Gawi told us this is simply another example. He noted to us that even upon a family member's death, one needs to be proactive in informing UNRWA, meaning that even Palestinians classified as refugees by UNRWA could very well remain on their rolls even after they pass. It's important to note that the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, which handles all non-Palestinian refugees globally, also doesn't allow refugees to relinquish their status simply upon request. But it does have specific ways that one can and must drop their refugee status, including acquiring citizenship in a safe country. But if you're an UNRWA refugee, it doesn't matter. You and your children and grandchildren will remain refugees until the UN decides you're not any longer. You simply don't have a choice. Reporting here from the White House, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
Thank you, Mike. And for more, still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, former international spokesman and in the IDF and a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. You are not surprised by this report by our Mike Wagenheim in the United States, our senior U.S. correspondent, and won't surprise you the claim that UNRWA is potentially inflating refugee rolls, refugee numbers. Your thoughts, your takeaways.
Yeah, great reporting by Mike. Sheds light on an absurd organization that really is such a significant part of the problem, stands in the way of progress, stands in the way of reconciliation, stands in the way of justice, and just is inflammatory in its very basic existence. It is in defiance of every other UN principle. There's one UN organization that deals with all of the world's refugees, and then there's one organization that deals with the former refugees from the Israel-Palestine conflict, but keeps them alive and gives them hereditary status. We're talking about more than 5.5 million so-called refugees today. Bella Hadid, in wherever she is a recognized UNRWA refugee. How absurd is that? That in itself should tell people how absurd this organization is. I think it is so long overdue that that organization is dismantled, that Arabs that fled from mandatory Palestine in 1948 would be assimilated and naturalized in the societies that they have been held captive, wherever they are, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and other places, or in other countries, and that Palestinians or Arabs do what every other refugee has done throughout history, including, I'm sure, your grandparents and my grandparents. They were refugees for a short while, endured hardship, and moved on, just like 99% of humanity does, except for Palestinians who are kept in that status. And here's the kicker, it's not for the benefit of the Palestinians. If I were a Palestinian nationalist, my number one order of the day would be to abolish that organization, because that is what stands in between Palestinians and a dignified future. As long as UNRWA exists, there won't be a Palestinian state, because they keep Palestinians needy, they keep them on a handout situation, and instead of really owning their future and having agency, they're contained as second or third class citizens in whatever country, and they're being kept in this miserable, controlled situation. So UNRWA is a travesty. I'm happy to see that more and more countries, including countries like Sweden, who were the first founders of UNRWA and who used to contribute money every year to UNRWA, for the first time in, I think, 76 years, Sweden decided not to contribute money to UNRWA anymore. Why? Because they understand that it is an abomination, that is much more of a problem than a solution. And I only hope that Israeli legislators will do more and say and do take clear legislative action. They've done one thing, which is to make it illegal for Israeli entities to operate with UNRWA. That's fine, but that's very basic. Israel needs to be at the forefront of this and to really lead the charge. I'm happy to see the Americans taking the step forward. And I really commend Mike for this reporting. It sheds a lot of light on the absurdity of the situation.
Absurd indeed. And again, thank you to our senior US correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Jonathan, stay with us, because talking about developments across the globe, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has announced that his country will recognize a Palestinian state at the United Nations General Assembly in September. This makes Australia the fourth major Western country planning to take this step next month. New Zealand is considering doing the same, but says they are still weighing their decision. More in this report by our Jacqueline Wiener.
Today I can confirm that at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September, Australia will recognise the state of Palestine. Australia will recognise the right of the Palestinian people to a state of their own, predicated on the commitments Australia has received from the Palestinian Authority. We will work with the international community to make this right a reality.
Australia is the latest country to announce that it will recognize a Palestinian state in September, following decisions by the UK, Canada, and France to do the same. The international pressure is mounting on Israel over the humanitarian situation in Gaza, leading to increased global support for Palestinians in the Strip and the West Bank. Israel has condemned any move to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state, especially as the Israeli military fights Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Israel's ambassador to Australia condemned the decision by the Australian government. He accused Australia of rewarding terror as Hamas, quote, continues to kill, kidnap, and reject peace. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese spoke out against Hamas in his announcement speech.
Our government has made it clear that there can be no role for the terrorists of Hamas in any future Palestinian state. This is one of the commitments Australia has sought and received from President Abbas and the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority has reaffirmed it recognises Israel's right to exist in peace and security. It has committed to demilitarise and to hold general elections.
However, Albanese did not make recognition of a Palestinian state conditional on whether Hamas is in power or not. New Zealand is also considering recognition, but has not made a decision yet.
Our view very clearly is that we're going to weigh up our position over the next month. We acknowledge that some of our close partners have and others haven't taken a position to formally recognise Palestine. It's a formal decision that Cabinet will take in September, and frankly, it's something that the Minister of Foreign Affairs will articulate when he's at the Leaders' Week in the UN at the end of September.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, is still in studio. Your reaction to this announcement by the Prime Minister? Not many are surprised given what's been happening in the country in recent months. Still, symbolic or not, he has said as much. What is your take and what are your concerns specifically for the Jewish community in Australia as we speak?
I am concerned for my friends in Australia. I visited there a few months ago, and I think Jews in Australia are very afraid, feel exposed, feel that they are fair game and targets of Palestinian activists and pro-Hamas supporters, pro-Iranian supporters, and an unholy mix of others, organizations, and I think that's very regrettable. I wasn't surprised. I was anticipating right after Canada, I thought Australia would be the next to stumble and hurry into that symbolic recognition. It's a sad day for Israel. I think it's a very poor report card on this government to have so many important Western democracies basically reward our enemy with the prize while we are at war. And that is something that I think, while I criticize and I think that it's a poorly judged decision by the Australians, I also look inward and I say, how do we find ourselves in a situation that democracies, not run by crazy extremist people, but by, middle of the road, perhaps not the best friends of Israel, but still Western democracies, do a thing which we understand really is aiding our enemy while we are fighting it? Because there should be no doubt. The organization that really benefits from this is Hamas. And to use an Israeli analogy, the silver platter of a Palestinian state, if there ever is one, will be Hamas's atrocities on October 7, if indeed these declarations become reality. And I think that's a travesty. And I really am amazed at how naive global leaders can be, that they can tie between one of these two things and make a logical connection, as if Hamas is going away from Gaza, as if they can assure that Hamas won't govern, as if Hamas won't leverage this, rightfully, as their victory. Because the PA didn't deliver on a Palestinian state, but Hamas has. And that is what Hamas will tell Palestinians the next time that they're asked to vote, and that is what they will benefit from. And if there are ever free elections for Palestinians, they will vote for the organization that brought them the biggest achievement, and they did it through murdering and raping and through taking our people hostage and by fighting. And it is sad to see these countries recognize it. What it does, it distances the chances for a deal even more, elevates the prices for us to get our hostages back, and it actually pushes Israel closer towards what we started to speak about in the beginning of the hour, moving into the big stage of operations, taking Gaza, and making sure that there's no Hamas to reap the benefits of this horrible Australian decision.
And as you say, all while 50 hostages remain in terror captivity in the terror tunnels of Gaza. Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, appreciate you being here
Thank you very
in
much.
studio as always. Thank you so much.